Okay, today I want to talk about one of the things I think is pretty cool, being a prepper. Now, when people hear the word prepper, most picture the same thing: camouflage, bunkers, ammo, and a stack of canned beans in the basement. Hollywood has done a great job of making prepping look extreme, fringe, and maybe even a little paranoid. But here's the truth: prepping isn't about paranoia, it's about preparation. Hence the word. Words mean things. It's about saying, if the world throws me a curveball, I won't be caught flat footed. And that's exactly what business continuity and disaster recovery, what we call BCDR in the enterprise, really is. Strip away the acronyms, and it's just prepping at the enterprise scale, beyond the stereotypes. Real prepping is simple: food, water, shelter, communications, medical. It's the family that has a couple weeks of groceries, not just 3 days. It's having a water filter in case the tap runs dry. It's knowing how to cook without power or how to heat your house when the grid is down. Prepping isn't an obsession, it's insurance. Insurance you control. Think about it. The person with a flashlight during a blackout isn't crazy. They're the neighbor everyone else runs to for help. So let's take an enterprise angle. BCDR beyond the checkbox. Boards and executives often view BCDR as a binder on the shelf: policies, phone trees, a once-a-year drill, maybe a tabletop thrown in here or there with a segment of the organization to get a sense of what it might look like. Or worse, it's just a compliance exercise to satisfy the auditors. But when the storm hits, the binder isn't what saves you. It's whether the plan has been lived, tested, internalized. Real BCDR is about protecting people, services, and operations so the mission continues no matter what. A hospital can't stop delivering care because the power goes out. A bank can't shrug its shoulders if payroll can't run. BCDR isn't theory, it's lifeblood. So let's bridge those two. Prepping and BCDR share the same DNA. One just happens at the family level, the other at the organizational level. Personal? Store water in your garage. Enterprise? Ensure redundant water systems are in your facilities, and they don't have pipes going over your data center. Personal? Have a backup generator at home. Enterprise? Test your backup power at the data center. Personal? Create a family meeting point after a disaster. Enterprise? Maintain alternate work locations and recovery sites. At home, preparedness means you don't have to stand in line at FEMA. At work, preparedness means your business isn't standing in line behind competitors when disruption hits. Take a moment. Think about this question. How many of you have a flashlight you know works right now? How about a week of food and water in your house? Now, how many of your companies have actually tested recovery of your critical systems in the last 6 months? Not just on paper, but in reality. So let's define what a prepper really is. It's not someone living in fear. It's someone living with foresight. And whether you're responsible for a household or an enterprise, the question is the same. When disruption hits, will you scramble, or will you already have a plan? Let's talk about levels of preparedness. Preparedness isn't one size fits all. Just like fitness, there are levels. You can be sedentary, in decent shape, or Olympic ready. Same with resilience. I like to frame it as the 3 rings of resilience. Think of it like concentric rings around you or your organization. Each ring builds on the last, adding more layers of security, confidence, and adaptability. So let's talk about ring 1, base level. Minimum viable preparedness. This is your survival baseline, enough to get you through the first punch. Personally, you need 72 hours of food and water for every individual in your household. You, your spouse, your children, and don't forget your pets. You need flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit. A simple family plan, like if we can't call, here's where we meet. This isn't a luxury. It's the absolute minimum, and everybody can do it. For the enterprise, you need offsite or cloud backups. You need an emergency call tree for key staff. You need a documented plan, even if it's basic. And you need enough to restore critical systems after a small outage. Base level doesn't make you comfortable. It makes you survivable. It's the difference between waiting helplessly and at least having a flashlight. So let's step it up a notch. Let's go to ring 2. I call this the optimal level. This is achievable preparedness. This is where preparation shifts from survivability to stability. It's not about barely scraping by. It's about being able to function. So again, let's take those two lenses. First one, personal. You need 2 to 4 weeks of food and water. You need a backup cooking method, propane stove, camp gear, heck, several candles and a metal plate. You need a generator or solar backup for power. You need a practice communication plan, maybe radios, maybe even a shared WhatsApp or Signal group. You also need medical basics beyond Band-Aids. Think about not only that first aid kit, but do you have 2 to 4 weeks of the medication that you might need? Medication that's vital to your survival. In the enterprise, we're talking redundant data centers or cloud failover. You need tested disaster recovery exercises twice a year. Tested, not talked about, not pretend, not academic. You need tested disaster recovery exercises twice a year. You also need vendor and supplier diversification. Don't have it look like a monolith. It should be spread out like a mesh. Primary, secondary, tertiary options for critical supplies and functions. You also need a clear crisis communications for employees, for customers, and depending on your group, for regulators. And you need leadership, trained to make decisions under stress. Optimal preparedness buys you time. At home, it means you're not panicking on day 4 of a blackout. At work, it means you don't lose customer trust after the first 48 hours of an outage. So what's beyond this? Well, ring 3, and literally the sky is the limit here. This is an aspirational level. This is anti-fragile preparedness, and it's the gold standard. You don't just survive disruption, you adapt and even thrive. At the personal level, we're talking about self-sufficiency, home garden, water filtration, maybe chickens or solar power. We're talking skills, a talent profile that brings basic medical training, situational awareness, and a security mindset to the table. And a strong local network, friends, neighbors, community groups who coordinate together. This is the ability to adapt, not just relying on stuff, but knowing how to improvise. At the enterprise level, we're talking fully distributed operations. Business that can pivot locations, teams, or systems seamlessly. Cyber resilience as culture, every employee trained, every executive leading by example. We're talking about continuous testing and improvement. Honestly, no plan is static at this level, and that once or twice a year disaster preparation, that's child's play. We're talking about continuous testing and improvement. And you need the ability to pivot strategically during crisis. You need to use disruption to come out stronger. At the aspirational level, you're not fragile anymore. You're anti-fragile. The storm makes you stronger. You don't just recover, you gain ground. It gives you the ability to invest when there's chaos in the streets. So let's bridge these two together. Personal. If you're at base level, a snowstorm knocks out power and you're okay for 3 days. At optimal, you're fine for weeks. At aspirational, you're helping neighbors. In the enterprise, if you're at base level, a ransomware attack takes you down for days. At optimal, you're back in business quickly. At aspirational, you use the crisis to modernize, strengthen customer loyalty, and actually improve market position. Make it simple. Base keeps you alive, Optimal keeps you stable. Aspirational makes you a leader others depend on. So, a little bit of reflection. Which ring are you in right now? Personally, be honest. And for your company, are you at base, optimal, or aspirational? Would your employees agree with you? Would your customers? Preparedness is a spectrum, not a destination. You don't need to be at the aspirational ring tomorrow. You just need to know where you are and what your next steps are. Because the storm doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It just comes. So what do people get wrong? Well, one of the biggest dangers in preparedness, whether at home or in the boardroom, is the illusion of being ready. People often mistake having stuff for being prepared. Prepping isn't about gear. BCDR isn't about binders. It's about practice, mindset, and adaptability. So let's talk about some personal missteps. Gear without skills. This is the person who buys a generator but never learns how to run it or stores it without fuel. This is the family with a closet full of freeze-dried food that no one's ever tasted or cooked. This is the guy with a medical kit who doesn't know CPR. The mindset of buy it once, check the box, never think about it again. Gear is only as good as your ability to use it under stress. Let that one sink in. Now let's cover some enterprise missteps. I'm going to call this binders without practice. Because this is the organization with a beautiful BCDR plan that lives on a SharePoint site no one opens. This is teams that run a once-a-year tabletop where everyone nods and then forgets. These are leaders who assume vendors will magically step in and solve the problem, as if you're their only customer and they don't have problems of their own. This is the mindset of document it once, satisfy the auditor, move on. Listen, that plan looks great in a PDF until the lights are out and no one remembers the password. It's like the other sections. Let's bridge these two together. Tools do not equal resilience. At a personal level, owning a water filter doesn't mean you can purify water. You have to practice. Enterprise, owning a backup solution doesn't mean you can recover. You have to test. Both are muscle memory. You don't rise to the equation, you fall to the level of your training. Listen, if you've never lit your camp stove before, the middle of a blackout isn't the time to learn. If you've never tested your disaster recovery plan, the middle of a ransomware attack is also not the time to find out if it works. So how many of you have tested your gear at home, actually cooked with your emergency stove, or run your generator? Maybe some things you need to do this weekend. How many of your companies have done a disaster recovery test, not just the tabletop? Let's let that reality sting a little. At the enterprise, I've done a recovery drill before that revealed hidden gaps. Backups were corrupt. Vendors were unavailable. Comm plans were outdated. And if we hadn't have done that, if we hadn't paid attention, we would have been running on false confidence. Which, by the way, is more dangerous than no plan at all. You see, preparedness isn't about owning things. It's about owning responsibility. Because whether it's your family or your company, the illusion of being ready is what creates the deepest failures when disruption comes. The hard truth? It's better to be modestly prepared and practiced than lavishly stocked and untested. So let's talk a little bit about mindset, the prepper mindset applied to business and life. So if gear isn't enough and binders aren't enough, what is the right approach? Well, it comes down to mindset. Whether you're prepping at home or building a BCDR plan, you have to think like a prepper, scenario-driven, redundant, adaptable. That mindset is the difference between scrambling and leading. So let's talk about principle number 1 there, scenario thinking. On the personal level, if the power goes out in winter, how do we heat the house? If cell towers go down, how do we talk to each other? If the car won't start, what's the backup plan? The enterprise, talking about things like, if ransomware locks us out for 5 days, how do we deliver patient care? If the supply chain collapses, how do we continue operations? If our headquarters is offline, where do employees go? Scenario thinking doesn't mean predicting everything. It means rehearsing how you'll respond to the things that you can think about. Don't be surprised by unsurprising things. Preppers don't predict the storm. They predict their response to the storm. Principle number 2 of the mindset here is redundancy. So, on a personal, always have 2 ways to cook, 2 ways to communicate, 2 ways to stay warm. Don't rely on one system. Secondary data centers, cloud backup, that's the enterprise equivalent here. Alternate suppliers, multiple communication channels in crisis comms. Redundancies cost something, of course, but failure costs more. Remember this line: 1 is none, 2 is 1. Redundancy isn't waste, it's resilience. Finally, the third principle I mentioned in the mindset is adaptability. At the personal level, the plan always breaks on contact with reality. Maybe your food spoils, maybe the gas runs out. Can you improvise? Be the person that can. Focus on that. At the enterprise level, the crisis never matches the tabletop. Maybe your backup vendor fails. Maybe the outage lasts weeks instead of hours. Can your team and your business adapt under that type of pressure? Adaptability comes from skills and leadership, not equipment or paperwork. I think I mentioned it before, but you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of preparation and you adapt to the rest. So connecting these two, at the personal level, a snowstorm takes out power. If you've got redundancy, heat source, food, comms, you adapt easily. At the enterprise level, a cyber attack locks systems. You've got backups, comms, alternate workflows. You adapt quickly. Both require leaders, adults at home, executives at work, to set the tone. Calm, prepared, decisive. So again, at home, do you have 2 different ways to cook a meal if the grid goes down today? At work, do you have 2 different ways to reach employees if email and Teams are offline? I want that to sink in a little bit because it's really how simple and how powerful redundancy really is. So, the prepper mindset isn't about paranoia. It's about scenarios. It's about redundancy and adaptability. Because whether you're running a household or a hospital, the real test isn't if disruption comes. It's how you respond when it does. And the prepper mindset makes sure your response is calm, confident, and effective. Sounds great, Jason, right? So why do leaders resist prepper thinking? Here's the thing. Almost everyone knows they should prepare, but most don't. Why? Because prepping, whether at home or in the enterprise, feels overwhelming, inconvenient, or unnecessary until it's too late. Reason 1 there is because of optimism bias. People always think, that'll never happen here. People assume their town won't flood, the power won't go out, the supply chain won't break. And at the enterprise level, executives assume disasters happen to other companies, not theirs. We've never had a breach. We've never had a major outage. You see, optimism bias is a comfortable but dangerous thing. Hope is not a plan. And denial is not resilience. Second reason, obvious cost avoidance. On the personal level, stockpiling food, water, or backup power feels expensive until the grocery shelves are empty or you can't even get to the store. At the enterprise level, redundant systems, backup sites, and drills cost money, and it's tempting to cut corners in the budget. But the cost of unpreparedness is always higher. Spoiled food, lost jobs, lawsuits, reputational damage. Preparedness is always cheaper than the alternative. Always. And I think a third reason is probably the invisibility of success. At a personal level, when nothing happens, people feel like prepping is a waste. We never needed the generator, so why did I buy it? At the enterprise level, when drills succeed, executives ask, why are we spending so much time on something we never use? The problem? Success in resilience looks like nothing happened. That invisibility makes it easy to devalue. Preparedness feels like wasted effort until the moment it saves you. Probably reason number 4 is the discomfort with hard conversations. Personally, families avoid talking about emergencies. Parents don't want to scare kids. Spouses don't want to sound paranoid. At the enterprise level, leaders avoid asking, what if we're offline for 30 days? What if lives are at stake? What if customers walk away? But resilience starts with honesty. If you can't face the hard questions, you can't lead through the hard times. Courageous leaders don't avoid hard conversations. They insist on them. So let's connect the two here. Personal level, prepping feels awkward until you need it. Enterprise, BCDR feels expensive until you need it. Both, in the end, leaders who resist prepping aren't protecting their people, they're leaving them exposed. And the same goes at the personal level. So at home, what's kept you from prepping more seriously? Cost, time, feeling like it's overkill? And at work, what's kept your organization from pushing BCDR past the bare minimum? Budget? Belief it won't happen? Lack of urgency? Where in there do you recognize any of those excuses? So to wrap that up, the resistance to prepping at home or at work always feels logical in the moment. But when disruption hits, excuses vanish. What's left is whether you led your people to safety or left them exposed. And the choice to prepare or to procrastinate, well, that's what separates leaders from bystanders. So let's talk about some practical things you can do. How can you prep at home and prep at work? So we've talked about the mindset, the levels of preparedness, and the reasons people resist. Now let's bring it all together. Because here's the truth. The principles don't change whether you're leading a household or an enterprise. The scale changes, of course, but the mindset is the same. So here's your personal checklist for home preparedness. Number 1, flashlights and batteries that actually work. Maybe even consider one of those crank ones. Water, at least a gallon per day per person in your household. Food, shelf-stable options for at least a week, more if possible. Power, a generator, solar, or even a simple battery bank for phones and radios. I'll put a link in there to one of the ones that I use, actually. I like it enough that I take it when I go camping. But it's a simple battery bank that has a solar charger on it, built in. So, all-in-one solution, perfect option. Medical, first aid kit plus basic training in CPR or wound care. I'll also give a link to what I use. Something you can probably start your first aid kit from home if you're interested in it. And finally, you need a family plan. Where to meet, how to communicate if phones are down. When things really hit the fan, everybody in your family needs to know where to meet. Both primary and secondary. Primary, if you can get home, everybody gets home. If you can't, then where's the secondary rally point? Preparedness at home isn't paranoia. It's love. It's leadership for your family. So get out there and get after it. At the enterprise level, it's organizational preparedness. You need backups tested, not just written down. You need alternate communication channels beyond email or beyond Teams. You need redundant systems or sites to keep core functions alive. You need supplier diversification to avoid single points of failure. You need incident response rehearsals so leaders and teams know their role under stress. And you need a culture of resilience where employees understand the why, not just the what. Preparedness at work isn't compliance. It's leadership for your people and your mission. So let's line them up side by side. At home, flashlights. At work, redundant power. At home, family meetup plan. At work, recovery site and comms plan. At home, food and water. At work, data and supply chain. At home, medical training. At work, employee training. The same way you'd never send your kids into a blackout without a flashlight, you shouldn't send your employees into a crisis without a tested plan. Preparedness isn't just individual, though. It's collective. At a personal level, neighbors helping neighbors, building a trusted circle. The family that preps can support others in times of need. The enterprise, partnerships across vendors, governments, industries, and peers in your particular vertical. A resilient organization doesn't just protect itself. It protects the ecosystem it depends on. In a crisis, isolation is fragility. Community is resilience. So, if you walk through your home right now, what's one gap that you could find today that you want to fix before disruption? And if you walked through your company right now, what's the one resilience gap that keeps you up at night? Write it down. Turn that reflection into action. Preparedness at home and preparedness at work are mirrors of each other. One teaches discipline for the other. The question isn't whether you're a prepper. You already are. The question is, are you preparing? Leaders don't wait. Leaders prepare. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. If it got you thinking about how you prep at home or in the boardroom, subscribe on Spotify or YouTube for more conversations at the intersection of leadership, resilience, and cybersecurity. And if you're just starting your personal prep journey, I'm going to include some affiliate links to a few items recommended for hitting that minimum viable preparedness level at home in your personal life. Things I use myself so you can skip the guesswork and at least get started on that minimum viable preparedness. So until next time, be present, get a plan, and make it happen. And by all means, remember, life's short. Drink good coffee, do cool stuff. Thanks for listening.